He married her for love, or so everyone thought. But one night, in front of family, friends, and flashing smiles, that illusion shattered. A single act of hate turned a celebration into a scene of humiliation, leaving her frozen in silence while laughter filled the room. He spat on her, called her worthless, unaware that the woman he tried to destroy held the power to end everything he'd ever built. This isn't just a story about cruelty. It's a reckoning born from quiet strength and buried truth, because sometimes the most underestimated person at the table is the one who owns it all. But what she does next will change everything, and no one at that table will see it coming. Emma Dawson had learned long ago how to live quietly in a world that watched her too closely. Every morning, she moved through the grand Dawson mansion like a ghost, polite, composed, unseen. The wife of Richard Dawson, one of the city's most celebrated businessmen. She was admired in public, pitted in private, and dismissed at home. To outsiders, she was lucky. To those inside the family, she was a reminder of everything they tried to keep out. A black woman in a white dynasty built on pride and legacy. She spent her days managing charity projects, attending company events, and keeping the peace in a house where love had long turned to performance. Richard's charm masked cruelty that surfaced only when the doors closed. His mother, Margaret, treated Emma with polite disdain, her words dipped in sugar but edged like glass. Still, Emma endured it all with quiet grace. She had learned that silence sometimes could be its own kind of armor. On the surface, her life looked picture perfect. A mansion, a husband of influence, a seat at every important table. But beneath the glittering surface lay tension, old prejudice wrapped in sophistication, waiting for the right moment to strike. And that moment was closer than anyone realized. Because tonight, at the family dinner meant to honor Richard's success, Emma would discover just how deep that hatred ran, and how powerful her silence could become. But what happens when silence is no longer protection and becomes a spark for revenge? The Dawson mansion glittered that evening, every corner polished to perfection, every smile rehearsed. The dinner was meant to be a celebration of success, Richard Dawson's success. But beneath the chandeliers and fine china, the air trembled with something colder. Emma sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, her dark skin framed by a sea of white faces. She had learned how to blend in, how to stay calm when the room wasn't made for her comfort. But tonight, even her stillness couldn't protect her. Richard had been drinking, his laughter louder, sharper. His mother, Margaret, watched Emma like a hawk, waiting for a flaw, a misstep, something to confirm her belief that Emma never belonged. The conversation turned to business, to profits, to the future of Dawson Enterprises. Richard boasted proudly about deals he barely understood, his arrogance filling every inch of space. When a guest raised a toast to him, Emma clapped politely, smiling just enough to be polite. That was when Richard's gaze turned on her, cold, cruel, calculating. "Quiet as always," he sneered, his voice rising above the laughter. The table fell silent. Emma froze, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. Richard's words came like poison disguised as humor, mocking her background, her voice, her very presence at his table. Margaret chuckled softly, feeding his cruelty with approving eyes. Around them, the guests shifted in their seats, their smiles faltering. No one spoke. No one stopped him. Each insult was a strike, and Emma absorbed them all, her face calm, her spine straight. Then came the moment that would scar the night. Richard leaned forward, his expression twisting with contempt, and spat in her direction. The sound was small but deafening. A droplet hit her dress. The room gasped. Forks clattered. The air shattered into silence. Emma didn't move. The humiliation burned hot under her skin, but she held herself still, her composure unbroken. Richard leaned back, smirking, enjoying the spectacle. "Now she looks the part," he said with a laugh, his voice dripping with pride. Around the table, people looked away, cowards hiding behind their shame. Even Claire, Emma's closest friend, sat frozen, her face torn between pity and something darker, something unspoken. Margaret's lips curled into satisfaction. Daniel, Richard's brother, watched with quiet fascination, as if the cruelty entertained him. And through it all, Emma said nothing. Her silence wasn't surrender, It was control. Inside, she felt something shift, something wake. The pain was real, but deeper than pain was power, the kind Richard could never recognize. She reached for a napkin, dabbing at her dress with slow, deliberate movements, refusing to let her hand shake. Her dignity was the one thing he could not stain. The dinner continued awkwardly, the laughter forced, the conversations brittle. Richard acted as if nothing had happened, boasting about his empire, unaware that the foundation beneath it no longer belonged to him. The guests nodded along, pretending the cruelty they'd witnessed was just an uncomfortable misunderstanding. Emma's gaze drifted to Richard's reflection in the wine glass before her. She didn't see a man. She saw a weakness dressed as power. He believed she was beneath him, yet every fortune he flaunted, every deal he celebrated, existed because of her unseen hand. If they only knew that the woman sitting quietly at the end of the table owned nearly everything they admired. When the dinner finally ended, Emma remained seated, alone with the echoes of laughter that no longer reached her. Claire lingered, touching her shoulder gently, whispering apologies that meant nothing. Emma only smiled faintly, her voice calm. "Don't be sorry for me." As the last guest left, the room fell silent again. The chandelier light shimmered over the stain on her dress, and in its reflection, something hardened inside her, a promise. What Richard had taken from her tonight, she would reclaim tenfold, not with tears, not with rage, but with truth. And when that truth came to light, it would burn through every lie he had built. She rose from her seat, her head high, her eyes cold as glass. What she did next would decide everything. For him, for her, and for the empire that carried his name but belonged to her. But Richard had no idea that the woman he tried to humiliate had just decided his fate. The night of the corporate gala gleamed with gold and glass, a stage built for Richard Dawson's ego. Cameras flashed, champagne flowed, and every guest who mattered whispered his name with rehearsed admiration. Emma moved through the crowd like a shadow, elegant, composed, invisible to those who had chosen not to see her. But beneath her calm, a storm brewed. She had spent years building this company from behind the curtain, investing her inheritance in silence while Richard took the credit. Tonight, she was done hiding. The boardroom upstairs pulsed with power and arrogance as Richard announced a bold new expansion, his voice booming, his grin sharp. Margaret sat beside him. Proud as ever, Claire hovered near the back, torn between guilt and desire, and Daniel watched, calculating. Emma sat quietly at the far end, her fingers folded neatly over the stack of documents that would end it all. When Richard dismissed her input yet again with a sneer, "This is business, Emma, not charity," she stood. The room fell silent. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the air like a blade. "Then let's talk business." Richard laughed until she slid the documents across the table. The laughter died. The directors leaned forward as Emma's calm words revealed the truth. The company's primary shares, the controlling 90%, all signed under her name. For years she had saved the empire he claimed as his, and now, in front of everyone who had laughed, she took it back. Richard's face drained of color, the smugness melting into disbelief. "That's impossible," he stammered, reaching for the papers with trembling hands. But Emma only watched, her eyes steady, her pain transformed into power. The room erupted in whispers, shock spreading like fire. Margaret gasped, her proud posture cracking into panic. Daniel's smirk flickered, his ambitions collapsing. Claire's heart twisted between shame and awe. Richard slammed his fist on the table, shouting threats that no one heard, because in that moment, everyone was looking at Emma, the woman they had overlooked, belittled, spat on, now standing as the owner of everything they worshipped. Years of humiliation condensed into this one breath, this one moment of quiet retribution. Emma didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You built your throne on my silence," she said evenly, "and tonight, that silence ends." Her words echoed through the boardroom, cutting through pride, through prejudice, through every lie that had once kept her small. Richard's anger erupted into desperation, but it was useless. The signatures were real, the truth undeniable. He had spat on the very woman who owned his world. The man who had called her worthless now stood stripped of everything. Title, power, legacy, before the woman he tried to destroy. Emma turned to leave, her steps calm, her dignity intact. Every head bowed as she passed, even those who had once laughed. But Richard stayed frozen, the empire crumbling in his hands, his reflection in the glass windows no longer that of a king, but a fool undone by his own arrogance. And as the elevator doors closed behind her, Emma didn't smile. Justice wasn't joy, it was freedom. But what the world would soon learn from her next move would make her name impossible to forget. When the truth came out, the empire trembled. News spread like wildfire, headlines calling it the Dawson scandal, a fall from grace the world couldn't look away from. Richard's name, once gilded in pride, became synonymous with disgrace. The board removed him. The investors fled, and the people who once bowed to him now turned their backs. Margaret disappeared from the spotlight, her silence louder than her years of scorn. Daniel tried to salvage what remained, but the foundation was gone. It had always belonged to Emma, and Claire, torn between guilt and the memory of her betrayal, watched from afar as Emma rose from the ashes she had once been buried under. But Emma didn't seek revenge. She sought renewal. She redirected the company's profits into scholarships, community centers, and foundations supporting black women in business. The very voices once silenced in rooms like that boardroom, the same walls that once held whispers of prejudice, now echoed with change. Yet even with victory in her hands, the scars remained. Because power doesn't erase pain, it only exposes the cost of survival. Emma would walk past those same halls, the same portraits of men who had doubted her, knowing that her strength was built from every insult, every moment she was told she didn't belong. Her story wasn't just her own. It was a reflection of countless others who have endured the weight of quiet racism dressed in civility. Her silence had been her weapon, but her truth became her legacy. In the end, she didn't just own a company. She owned her freedom. And as she stood before the city skyline, dawn breaking over the horizon, her voice echoed softly, not in anger, but in conviction. They thought I was less, but I was always more. Because this story isn't just about one woman. It's about every person who has ever been made to feel small for the color of their skin, every soul told to wait, to endure, to be quiet. How many more must suffer before silence becomes power and injustice becomes history? The question lingers, not for her, but for us